You want to get into making art, and I want you to make art. So today on Brushwork Podcast, my friend Jennifer and I are doing a crash course onto the basics of becoming a painter. We're going to go over what you need, what kind of classes to take, where to get supplies, and most importantly, how to keep making art for many years into the future. We're going to go over mindsets, we're going to go over where you can get discounts on art supplies. We're going to go over so many things that are for beginners, no matter your age. Get yourself a cup of tea, pull out a sketchbook, and let's get going. This is Brushwork. Maybe you are a beginner in making art and you want to get into the world of painting and you don't know even how to do it. Jen and I are here to help you. I am an oil painter. I work in abstraction. I have a history in landscape painting and equestrian art, and I am here to be your oil painting expert today.
I am an abstract painter and I work primarily in acrylic and like acrylic inks. So super rich and thick.
We both have a lot of experience in painting and a lot of experience at being a beginner at something and turning it into something that we actually like. I really wanted Jennifer on this podcast today to kind of have a broadening of experiences to talk from when you're being a beginner in art and you want to dive in and you don't really know where to go. You don't know who to study under or even like what subjects to study and like what kind of materials you need. And so Jennifer and I are talking to you with the assumption that you have nothing. You have no experience, but you have the urge to create, and that seems very exciting, and we're excited that you want to join us in the art world. One quick caveat is we're not going to talk about making money with art in this episode. We're going to talk to you about just getting creative and managing to make a creative practice that is regular and interesting and keeps you coming back to the materials that you're going to spend money on. Having a hobby in art is really fun, and it's a little bit of an investment of your time, but also in finances. So some of the things we recommend, they're going to cost money, and that's just how it goes with any hobby. So keep that in mind when we start talking about the prices of things. We don't want you to get sticker shock, but also it's just the reality of what materials cost nowadays. Jen, when you were a beginner in art, like what made you like really want to start painting?
So a little bit of my background is that I've mostly created on screens. So I've made web designs, app designs, graphic design, and film. So big screens and small screens. I started off studying art and design, but I fell directly into making work for screens. And I stayed there for a really long time, like 20 years.
Wow.
And what
Yeah.
ended up pulling me back was that I physically did not want to be sitting down making art anymore. I knew in my heart it was time to get up from the screen and go make something with my hands in the physical world. So that was really what pulled me back to it.
It's such a joy to go from something digital to like actually molding things with your hands and getting dirty, getting messy.
Dirty. And your finger, like you're constantly scrubbing like paint off of your fingernails. Like it is so fun. Like physically, I didn't want this, like the clicking of a mouse to be like how I created. Like I wanted to move from like my shoulders and my elbows and like really have the experience of making art part of the joy of making art, not just like the final product.
I feel like the first thing we should talk about is your wardrobe when you want to make art, and which is you should have some clothes that you don't mind getting messy. I have this white dress on right now, and I got some cadmium paint on it, and cadmium is this bright, punchy red. And I'm like, I guess this is a painting dress now. I don't know why I wore it to the studio, but here we are. So
there's always wet paint in the studio. There's always wet paint. It doesn't matter if you didn't paint for a year. Somehow you'll walk in and walk out with paint on.
It's part of the fun getting like pigment under your nails and getting graphite in your skin and then, washing it off later. Having some clothes that you don't mind getting messy in, and you can have like your little like art uniform.
I'm not very much into rituals, but once you put that on, then you know that's the work you're going to do. I think when you're just starting a new hobby, especially something that requires a creative leap, and you have to get over the beginner stage of like knowing you want to, and then knowing whatever you make in the first little bit's going to be surprising. So it might not be what you imagined. having just the idea that I'm in these clothes and I'm going to go do that thing
Hmm.
is so helpful. And it's a signal to anybody else around you. So if you have pressures on your time, you're like, nope, I'm painting. I'll see you in an hour.
Exactly. Exactly. It's really good. If you're a beginner, you're probably not going to have a giant art studio. You're probably going to have like a desk in your house, or maybe you'll have a
Kitchen
little
table.
closet, a little kitchen
Yep.
table. Yeah. Making a space for your art, it's something that's going to encourage you to continue making art in the future beyond this like first initial spark of like desire. And what was your first painting space? Do you remember?
Yeah, is this kitchen table that I'm sitting at right now. And
This one.
so, yep, it's you can see basically almost my whole space. So I have space, but everything is constantly visible. So, living in a loft requires an ability to like tuck things away or ignore them. You have, or you live in the mess. But one of the things that I ended up doing was less like the actual space. Because sometimes I paint on the floor, sometimes I paint on the deck or the kitchen table. But I created a drawer in my closet that had my art supplies. And then
Oh.
you could, and even if it's just like those, a bin, a box, something where you could take the whole thing out and set up your studio. And then when you need to have dinner, the whole thing kind of tucks back away. So I was able to move a little bit around the house with what was like most convenient for that, whatever I was working on. But having a place to put everything was so helpful. At some point, we shrunk the space between the couch and the entryway. Like, so you really had to like almost walk sideways to get in. And I set up a desk behind the couch. And that was nice because then it could all just stay out and didn't get tucked away. But that was like phase two. Phase
Hmm.
one was drawer, pull everything out. Phase two, make the rest of the room a little bit smaller. And I had room for a desk, which was really nice.
My first painting studio space, and I like calling any art space that you're making your studio, whether or not
Same.
it's a kitchen table. Mine was in my bedroom. It was a desk I had, and it was like next to my homework, and it was great. It was like 2 square feet of desk I had, and I'm like, this is perfect. Painting away, and I finally got to the point I started making art when I was really young, and my mom was like, okay, you got to stop painting on those like nice desks that you just like stole from the office. Instead, here's an IKEA desk that cost like $20 and you can get as much paint on it as you like.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Also,
um
I don't know if this is true for oils. You'll have to answer, but glass tabletops are amazing for acrylics because you can
why?
get paint everywhere. It dries on it, and then you just need a scraper to like scrape it off, and you get constantly get a clean surface. So it's not always like rolling out paper and throwing it away. You just once the paint is dry, like you just hit it with water, let the water sit for a little bit, and paint like it comes off in no time and you've got a clean desk again. If you have like old plexiglass or old glass, I actually took an old picture frame and just took the glass from that
Oh,
and put
genius.
tape around it because the edges are kind of,
Sharp.
sharp. And that was like my paint palette slash piece of a desk. So like your brushes could just sit on there and you've got a space that can constantly be reset.
That's really great. I loved using wax paper as my first oil painting. You should layer like 3 or 4 sheets of it, but then you can tape it down to your desk and it makes a really easy palette that you can just throw away. With
Oh,
oil
that's
paint, you
awesome.
do need to think about fire safety. And so I would throw things away outside of your house, like into the bins, like immediately after you're done painting for the day. And that's just general safety. I feel like oil paint has such a like scary barrier around it for making it. Like I'm already talking about fire safety and you're like, I want to do oil paint, but also like there are things to think about. I feel like you can enter painting in oil paint. It just takes a little bit more guts.
That makes
People get
sense.
yeah, people get scared of like the fumes or whatever. Oil painting science has really transformed a lot, and you don't need a lot of the mediums that create the fumes to make an oil painting. You can start with oil paint and it can be a lot of fun. Usually though, people will get attracted to watercolors or acrylics first. It's a lot more approachable. Also, the price point is a lot less than oils are. What is your biggest mistake that you see with beginners in acrylic paints?
The mistake is buying expensive brushes. Buy
Oh,
the absolute cheapest brushes for acrylics you could stomach. Watercolors, I don't know about oils, but for watercolor, good brushes for me really made a difference and you could clean them and very infrequently ruin them. For acrylic paint, almost all acrylic paint, unless you use some kind of medium to help it open, it dries quick. And once it's dried, your brush can be ruined. There are some solvents that you could use, but they're really toxic. I don't
Yeah.
like using them. And I don't want to be precious with it. Like, I don't want to think, oh, I have to quickly go back and attend to my brush. Like, that's not, your brush should not be leading
The
your
point of the
painting.
painting. Yeah.
Yeah. So for acrylics, the thing I see people doing is buying expensive brushes. And I'm like, oh, I hope that works for you. Like, and maybe it does. And maybe your style will play nicely with how fast acrylic paint dries. But cheap brushes, I'd say, is the way to definitely go.
Like get one of those giant packs of like 12 brushes for $10 and just like go ham.
Yeah. Like honestly, I often get brushes at the hardware store because they come in all sizes. And whenever I first get them, I just kind of tug at them to see if any bristles are loose. And
Mhm.
if like get the bristles out, because all it needs to do is hold the paint and move it, especially when you're starting, give yourself the freedom to like play and see what you're really looking for. And then you'll know I need that one fancy good brush. And I have a few of those. So I'm not
Nice.
saying never, just when you're
When you're
starting,
starting.
understand why.
With oil paintings, I would say get synthetic brushes first
Oh
instead
yeah.
of animal hair brushes, which are going to be triple the price. And those you can worry free. You can ruin them as much as you like. The thing about oil painting that's really kind to beginners is that it takes forever to dry. And sometimes it's a curse, but sometimes it's a blessing when you're like, okay, I don't have to worry about cleaning my brush immediately. I can just set it down for 3 days and it'll still be wet.
Yeah, like acrylic paint's the opposite, like 3 hours, you're like,
Mhm.
mm.
I feel like if you're beginning with painting, don't be buying like really expensive canvases. You should buy like really cheap paper that's like that can handle oil painting or can handle acrylic paint, but having something cheap that you can make a lot of is clutch. But usually that means it won't have a rigid surface to paint on. It'll be kind of floppy.
I recommend, well, and I just bought a whole new two packs of it, but I paint in acrylics, like you said, but I often use good watercolor paper and instead of canvas, like good watercolor paper can be extremely expensive, but there's this middle tier that's high enough quality that you really get the feel of what you're working on. And it could be a complete painting that is framed and displayed. And it's, the acid free and all of the right words, but it's on paper. So you can make multiples of it and really practice. I think sometimes with canvases, it feels somehow precious or like you have to get that one right. And with painting, as with any creative endeavor, it's all about practice. And so the finding the medium and the substrate that you want to work on is excellent.
Making your own creative practice when you have no experience at all is something that you kind of have to just jump into and know that it's going to evolve as your interests evolve. When I'm thinking back onto my very first times of like making art and my creative practice, I feel like you have this like big wave at first where you're just like really excited to make art, and then it kind of plateaus, and then it kind of dips down unless something brings your interest back up. Have you considered scheduling your art time into your calendar? Like any other sport you might do or any other like hobby that you might have? You protect the time that you have for making art and it becomes something to look forward to, especially at the end of a work week or after you've like dropped your kids off from school or like whatever you're doing. And having a time where you're just like, okay, I'm going to spend an hour 3 times a week on your art can be really great. What do you think?
Oh, I totally agree. Because if you're waiting to get really excited about it, like you said, it will go in waves. And I think you can feel like it's something you're not going to pursue if you don't have it scheduled. Because if you have a down wave and you don't have another one scheduled, it's going to be harder to get back to it. It's literally just like going to the gym, like, or getting out for a hike.
Uh-huh.
Like you plan for it and you look forward to it. And some days it's going to be raining and it's going to be muddy and other times it's going to be the perfect day. But if you always have it, then it is part of who you are as opposed to something that you're just trying out. And I think you're allowed to say, I am working on art now. And like it's part of what you're doing
Hmm.
from day one. So I think scheduling it is a really, really good idea.
It's fun. It worked out for me. I love having a ritual around making art too, where you put on your art making outfit and maybe you make a cup of tea or cup of coffee and then you go and you approach your materials. Sometimes though, when you approach your materials, you can feel like some hesitance, especially if you have like a lot of new stuff. In which case, I think a really great part of your art practice is, and this is my favorite advice, make a list of all the things you would want to achieve with your art, and then you're gonna like break it down into like its teeniest, tiniest little exercise that you can possibly find. And you're gonna have to like look around for art exercises, and we'll get to that in a second here. But say you want to make like a beautiful portrait of your daughter, right? And you want to do it with your acrylics, and you're like, okay, the first step would be finding a photo of my daughter because she's probably not going to sit in front of me for 2 hours while I figure out how to draw her. So you find that's like step one, and that is still part of the art making process. I feel like a lot of times people who are new to art think I'm only making art if I'm like literally putting a brush to the paint, but creativity happens in all sorts of ways and all sorts of steps. So finding the portrait of your daughter that you want to paint, and then pulling out the colors and practice mixing the colors and practice making the shapes, and then practice drawing out the portrait outline of her. And then you kind of have all these next steps, and this might take you 2 weeks. It might take you a single session, but having this sort of thought about the plan of your art is really fun. And also being impulsive is fun too.
Yeah. But I do think what you said like really hit home because it is everything that you do. Being an artist and making art is about how you look at the world. And you're working on art if you're out and about and you see some cool graffiti and you take a photo because you like those colors and you want to bring them back to your next project. So I think having a set schedule is really helpful in like breaking down what a project is, but also being aware that you're always doing it. Like it's something that it's kind of constant, and your creativity and your imagination is just always sparking.
It's sparking. It's fun. I like doing research sometimes during my creative hours where I'm like looking up other artists that I like. I like going to the library and getting art books. You know, like when you go to a museum and you see these like $50 beautiful art books, you can get them for free at the library because you probably don't want to read them more than once. I'm just saying. It's fun to do research there and going online and finding cool inspiration and at some point you're gonna get hooked by an idea, and that's when you want to dig your teeth into it and figure out, okay, I have this idea for making something. And when you're a beginner, you're not going to be trained for your brain to connect to your hand immediately. In fact, it'll probably take a couple of years, let's be real. And that's okay. But taking that idea that you have and really running with it is going to make you more encouraged to make more in the future, which is very fun.
I think is a good way to approach any art time is dividing it up between, especially when you're just starting, the materials and the work, because there's so much to learn about the materials and to spend some time just investigating them. Like, what substrate do you paint on? What kind of paints do you like? What kind of brushes do you like? Or maybe you don't like brushes at all. Maybe you're using spray paint or
A palette
scrapers
knife.
or
Yeah.
palette knife. Like, there's so many different ways to engage. So I think it's really fun to think about, like, what do I want my work to feel like when I make it? Or what do I want to feel like when I'm making it? What do I want it to feel like or look like at the end? And then what are the tools that help me get there? Because these two are constantly connected, but knowing that there's learning on both sides of it, I think will really let you like play with some of that art time to say, like, with today I'm testing out paintbrushes. I use the word testing out all the time. Like, I'm testing this out. I want to see like, it's like having an art lab, you know?
Yeah, it's an experiment, and that's what makes the creativity really fun. I'm testing this out and I'm testing that out, and I'm just gonna try my little experiments until something works.
Yeah, well, and then you kind of see it. I don't know. We have a Michael's around here and some independent stores and Blick, but a bunch of them often host paint reps for free workshops, like
Oh,
Golden and Liquitex. They'll send somebody out, and sometimes it's like $5, sometimes it's free, but you sign up and then they basically walk you through their line of supplies. So whenever you can, try to find these, and they let you know like if there's a rep in your area, and then you could go to that rep's website and find out when they're presenting one of these again. But I love these for seeing thinned out mediums to the really thick mediums. And then she showed one called fiber, like this fiber paste medium that makes, if you wanted to make like your canvas feel like paper, but then you didn't have to go buy all of them. So it's not quite a library where you get to like take it home with you, but they did sometimes give you little samples, but sometimes they would just pull it out of their toolkit and show it to you.
Wow.
And that was really nice. So I'd say like embrace like the reps from the companies. They take so much pride in the paints they make and the products they make, and they're so happy to show it off, you know, and so ask good questions and listen to what other people ask. But I think it's a really good resource.
Having a hunger for knowledge is going to take you really far, and having a hunger for experimentation and trying to figure out what these materials do, it's going to continue to make your art better, but also to feed your interest in the painting itself. Where do you have a favorite art supply store you really like?
Yeah. So I go back and forth. One of them's Blick and the other is a
Blick is so
local
good.
place called Flax. And they've got two locations near me, and I absolutely love both of them. And everybody who works there knows what they're talking. Like it's so fun. You go in, you're like, I've been thinking about this thing, and I've never not had somebody get excited to chat with me about it. Like it's so fun.
If you ever have like a problem with your work and you're just like, I don't know how to overcome a certain obstacle, going to an art supply store and just asking literally anyone who works there, maybe not a Michael's, but definitely like an art supply store. Most of the people working there are working artists also, or sometimes they're even art students, and they will absolutely either send you to someone who does know the answer or help you try to figure it out. Like sometimes they'll be like, who needs like, to man the cash registers? Let's go figure out this art problem for you. They're so
I know.
nice.
It's so nice. It's also so fun because your problem solving skill set will only take you so far. And art is often a solo endeavor. So when you
Hmm.
hit a problem, it's just your skill set trying to solve it. But the second you ask somebody tapping into their knowledge base, they'll come up with solutions that you're like, oh, well, I didn't think about that.
It's great advice. I've talked to many a spunky young art student and been like, how do I solve this? And sometimes they're so blasé about it. They're like, oh, you just do this. And you're like, sorry, what?
That was the answer this whole time that I needed. Thank you.
Thank you. It's perfect. No, no, it's so cute. It's so good.
It's so
I
good.
love going to art supply stores. A Blick is one of my favorites. They have an online store too, dickblick.com. And I go to them for basically everything. They're a national chain. Maybe they're international. I don't know. They're definitely all over the United States. And they have the full range of products. They're going to have like your cheap student grade, like very, very cheap, basically not worth buying stuff, all the way to like easels that are like $600. And you're like, what?
You do have to be careful. Like
Yeah.
when you walk down the aisles, you'll until you really get super familiar, you'll look and like they'll have one brand all together and you'll get excited about a color over here and a color over there, but they're from different, like the student grades here and then like the pros there. And you look at the price, you go, oh, all
Yeah.
right.
It's wild. Learning how to read an art supply store is it takes some practice. If you ever go into a store and say you're looking at oil paints, if it ever says like hue next to something, that means that manufacturer has taken the color that is really expensive and sometimes toxic and made it into basically an identical color that is safe to use and a lot cheaper. Would recommend for students, for beginners. Take some time in an art supply store and like watch your budget. Speaking of budgets, I feel like when you're starting out and you're like buying everything for the first time, it could feel like a lot of money. And in the past, I've done an episode of Brushwork where I've talked about how to get started in oil painting for under $130, which was like the minimum I could make it for truly starting out. And I'm gonna link that episode in the show notes. But what supplies do you think you would need to like really truly launch? You're like, I have only a desk in my house and I want to make paintings. What sort of supplies would you get for acrylic painting?
That's a really good question. I don't know if everybody's going to agree with this. So I'm going to say what I think, and Stevie, feel free and
Yeah.
go the other way. When I was in school, you had to get the primary colors and really learn how to mix any other color paint from the primary colors. And this is how like you could extend a budget because you only need so many and you could come up with so many colors.
Hmm.
But I really like painting with colors that cannot be mixed. Like I really like painting with really brights and really pure colors. And for me, what I did instead of doing that thing, I picked some of my favorite colors. I know I've heard so many artists be like, well, I could mix that. I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to keep mixing. Every time I sit down before I start, I have to mix, but I know I want that blue or that
Exactly.
aqua color. I want that aqua color. So I think that follow your curiosity and what like gets you excited about it. So get the colors you want and don't buy all of them. Get like I'm not going to say like a super limited palette, but maybe 8 colors. Like you don't need all. Obviously I love like just a black and a white in your toolkit. Then get the ones that you're drawn to.
Hmm.
And especially when you're starting, then you just get to see how they move on the page and interact and how to use the brush and how, like you were talking about the portrait, how to make the marks. For a little bit, I was turned off from making art because a lot of like these art sometimes comes with like a bunch of like tradition and like steeped in like this old school like pillars. And there's a
Yep.
lot of like very traditional ways of approaching art that for me really made it not fun. Like it wasn't part of my practice to do that. So what I would say, of course you could go that way and get like the basic colors and learn really how to mix. I'd say understand what it is that's exciting you about sitting down to paint and then go get those things. Like you mix and I go from tube.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I almost never pull a color straight from the tube, and when I do, I'm just like, that's not right. Yeah, it's total different ways of painting, even though we both make abstraction. I am a huge fan of mixing colors, but I learned that from taking many classes and having lots of exercises and practicing those. And I feel like my style that I have now developed from trying out all these things. And when I first started my oil paints, I bought my favorite colors, like Jennifer was saying. And I was like, I would like this phthalo blue and I would like this yellow, and that's all I need. And like, and then
Yeah.
I quickly realized I was like, maybe a red also.
Yeah.
Having some really basic tones is really good for oil painting. Having a black that is ivory, having a titanium white is a really great place to start. I love having the double primary palette for oil paints, which I will explain right now. Basically, it means you have your primary colors. You have a yellow, a red, and a blue. But for each of those colors, you're going to have a warm red and a cold red. So a red that's like really hot, think like fire engine, and then a red that's really cold that is like almost purpley. And then you do that for each of the primary colors. And that way you have like a really rich spectrum of colors to work from. So you have a hot red and a cold red, a hot blue, a cold blue, a hot yellow, like a cadmium, and a cold yellow, like a lemon. And that will let you just like basically explode in every way that you want to with with making a painting that is just really fun. And so that's 8 colors right there. For oil paints, having a little bit of linseed oil can be really helpful for thinning out the paint because when you first pour it out, you're gonna be like, this is like toothpaste, and I don't like this. I would also recommend with oil paint not mixing with your brush. Instead, get a palette knife and mix with it. You should get something that has like a point instead of a rounded end so you can pick up a little bit of color at a time. And you can get pretty scrappy with having a palette. You can have something that's glass, like you do with acrylics. You can have something that is plastic. You can have something that has like those little wells and like a place for your thumb. Like when you think about a painter with a palette and it's wood, you can have one of those. I don't like wood. I find it soaks up all the oil of the oil paint unless you season it, which just means pouring a ton of oil on it for layers and layers and layers. And then, eventually you'll be ready to paint on it in like 2 months. It takes time. It's very annoying. It's very like every time I see a wood palette in like a beginner set, I'm like, that's mean.
It's
It's not
mean.
nice.
No, like your wax paper suggestion. Like
Yeah,
that's
it's all you need. And then some tape is nice, but those are the basics. You want to get some good canvas to paint on or like oil painting paper. For oil paint, make sure it says oil painting paper. Otherwise, the oil will seep out of the color on this day two. And then you'll have these like weird spots of oil color just like on your paper. And you're like, what's going on? So make sure that it's like thick enough and it says oil painting paper. Someone at your store can help you. Canvas paper is nice. And getting like actual canvases can be fun too. You can get them for like pretty cheap nowadays. Yeah, that's the basics.
well, and talking about Blick, your favorite art store, they often have canvas sales and so does Michael's.
Oh, yes.
Once you're ready, like invest in a few, but sign up for their emails and that you'll know when there's a canvas sale. Like the Michaels has a good one every, I think once or twice a year, and it's
Yeah,
buy one, get two free.
it's wild.
It's
It's
insane. It's
you
insane.
can stock up.
You can, and I do like that's what I do. One of the things that for acrylic that I started with, because they do have acrylic paper, and I sometimes got that, but they have a ton of watercolor paper, and I ended up using watercolor paper with acrylic, and it worked fine.
You can be pretty flexible when you are feeling like, okay, but what if I like want to start getting some like gear for my art? Like I want to start getting like an iconic one is the easel. I feel like the moment you think, oh, it'd be nice to have an easel, you should get yourself an easel.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, a trick I used that I still use today, that I used when I was a beginner, is if you have a blank space of wall, you can just put in two nails on the wall and hang a piece of canvas up, and then boom, you can paint on the wall standing. I do it here, I do it all the time. It's one of my preferred ways of painting. So if you're like, I'd like an easel, but all I have is two nails, you're good to go.
You're good to go. But I think that what you just said reminded me of also paying attention to how you want your painting time to look like. I actually started with watercolor, but watercolor for me was sitting down and being very concise and neat. And I was moving from like fingers and wrists to like make marks. And that was so similar to working on a computer with a mouse. I
Mm.
was sitting with a flat surface, and my tool for moving color around instead of a mouse was this brush. And the product was different, like the final output, and it wasn't a screen, but it felt in my body very similar. And I knew I wanted a much more active practice. So, like you were just saying, if you want to stand, like I often paint on the floor. So for me, what I invested in was like a waterproof rug, like something that
Perfect.
people have when they have pets. I think it's kind of fun when you go into the store and like you're kind of romanticizing what the painting life is like. But I think being really clear with yourself on like what you want, what you actually want to do. Like I want to wear yoga pants. I want to sit on the floor. I want to be able to like stretch and move and reach and go from shoulders, and not just, even if you don't quite know how it's all going to translate into your artwork, how you actually make art is a huge piece of what will keep you engaged in it. So like support it.
I love fantasizing about what I want my life to look like, and you should absolutely do this if you want to paint. Like, fantasize what it'll look like what you will look like while you're painting, and like what you'll be listening to, and what smells will be happening in the room, and what sort of things you'll be making. And then use that as like your goal. Like, use that as like your indicator of should I purchase these things or not purchase these things, or should I practice this stuff or not this stuff? What's a mindset that you like to have when you get to the studio?
I unlock the door and I walk in. And one of the things I do have one of those fancy books that you buy after you're at a museum and you're inspired. It's Joan Mitchell.
Oh, I
And
love her.
I love her so much. But I walk in and I pretend she's in the studio. So I walk in and the first thing I say is, "Hi, Joan." I think the mindset is I'm part of a thing that has existed over a lot of time. And Joan is one of the people I know in this space. I go through, even just through 1 hour, like a ton of work comes out and a lot of sitting and just staring, and then a ton more. And then, oh, I have to go wash my brushes. Like there's all of these phases, but just being aware that a zillion artists have gone through this before. And I don't know, there's something about, so I say hello to Joan. So that's part of, that's part of how I enter the studio.
When you make art, you're joining a long history of really incredible artists before you, and it's a joy to know that they started out as a beginner at one point also.
Yeah.
And they made a lot of bad artwork, and then they made a lot of good artwork, and that's the stuff you see nowadays.
I actually got introduced to her art after she had already died, but I like thinking like the history of it still continues. So like you're part of this thing. I don't know. I really enjoy it. And she was also a beginner at some point.
Your favorite at anything was a beginner at that thing at one point, and maybe they started when they were 6, and maybe they started when they were 42. And you can start art at any time, and that's the beauty of it.
I love it.
So painting is exciting, and just diving into the materials is fun, and learning about the different kinds of brushes and paints and like mixing, it's all good. What other skills would you recommend that someone learn to help painting?
Okay, I've got two things. One is frame something with a mat.
Ooh.
I think that the second you see something hung and done, and I think framing something makes it done, gives you so much perspective. So with the very first piece, I still have it. It wasn't very good. I used some of my favorite colors, but I liked this one little spot. And what I ended up doing was I took like just a regular frame that had a photo, like a family photo in it,
You're
and
like, goodbye,
replaced
family.
it. Yeah, they're done. They know we love them. They don't need the space. I'm learning art. But then I moved my piece inside the frame or inside the mat and then closed up the frame and hung it. And I stepped back and looked at it, and I realized right then for me that that moment made it so clear that there was where my art was going. I had been trying for a long time to fill up the whole page and use up all the space. And every time I felt I pushed my paintings too far. To this day, that's still my biggest problem. By the way, I'm still like, that was day one lesson. I'm still on it, but at least I know it. But seeing it framed was such an eye-opening experience for what I liked and how to call something complete. So I recommend framing something or maybe just buying a mat or
Mhm.
cutting a mat out and really looking at your art, but get it off of the art making space and put it on art viewing space.
Yeah,
So I think that that's one of my biggest, like
that's
that for me
transformative.
it was, it was just such an aha moment. Like I realized I'm more of a minimalist painter than I was setting out to be. Like lots of white space, one idea, one mark, and I knew it from the second I hung that first piece. The other thing I'd say, and I'm assuming everybody has a cell phone right now that has a camera on it, take photos of everything that inspires you. Because I
Mm.
think that when you're making art, it all kind of comes from your memories and your experiences. And people, you can put stuff up in your space to inspire you. But I think capturing what it is that you see without making it like I'm sitting down to do a full sketch. And then when you're feeling stuck, you open those photos and you flip through it and you realize you'll see a through thread of what you're drawn to. A lot of I know a lot of people who paint outside or sketch outside, that becomes an art practice as opposed to just like observing what you're excited about in the world. Like I'm excited about tree bark. I love how bizarre it could look, but it also is like super stark in color and there's
Mhm.
movement with lines. So it's not like I'm going to sit down and draw that, but I have a lot of photos of that. So I think like pay attention to that when you're out and about. And it's fun to flip through when you're at the studio to say like, who am I? And what is it that inspires me?
It's like sketching with your phone camera.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, just taking snapshots. That is great advice. That is really good advice.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's such a nice tool now because it takes you almost no time,
Mhm.
but the impact of the photo you take, like it could really, I don't know. I'm such a fan.
I'm gonna follow through on this collection thing. So first off, I really think you should have a sketchbook and you should either be journaling or sketching in that sketchbook like every day. I feel like just doodling with a pen and then like writing a little bit about your thoughts about your drawings or your creative practice each day is like really fantastic. Sometimes I call this a studio log, and it's like
Ooh.
every day that I go to make something, I will make a little sketch or I'll write a little blurb about what happened or what I did that day. Very fun.
Wait,
But
can I ask, do you start your day with that or end your day with that?
I end it.
Oh,
So it's like a history instead of
yeah.
like, this is my intention. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
It's very fun. Anyway, so having like a sketchbook is really great, but also some things I like to do when it's not like I'm recording what's happening that day is it's basically collage. I like collecting things to put in the sketchbook. I like collecting images, pieces from magazines or junk mail that people have sent me or postcards that people have sent me, or if I go out to an exhibit or something, I take the pamphlets and then I'll like cut out a little part of it and I'll paste it into my sketchbook, and then I'll journal around it and I'll talk about what I'm feeling about it and things like that. So it's the same as collecting images with your phone, but more physical. It's paper,
Yeah.
and it's really fun, and it keeps you looking for things out in the wild, and that feeds your creativity. That is my favorite practice to do.
Oh, I really love that idea.
Yeah. It's fun. And my second thing, I would highly recommend you take a drawing class. And it's not painting, but I feel like when you learn how to draw, it helps your art no matter what you're making. Like if you, I'm an abstract painter now, but when I first started, I did lots of landscapes and I did lots of portraiture and things like that. And learning how to draw absolutely helps my abstract pieces get better. It trains your hand to actually do what you're seeing. And that's something that can only come with practice and having an instructor to help you get there, like a real drawing class, not just something you see, I guess, on YouTube or whatever. I mean, that's useful too, but like having someone to instruct you to really help you with that is so important. And it will take you really far, really fast. Just saying.
That makes sense. Do you draw anymore?
Not very often, but taking those classes did like train me to see what was going on. Like at this point, if you've ever done a blind contour drawing, I would highly recommend doing them. They're extremely silly and very fun, and they teach you a lot about what your hand is actually doing versus what you think it's doing.
I
But at
love
this,
them.
they're so much fun, and they can take like 5 minutes. Maybe I'll do a tutorial on brushwork for that sometime. I can do those now and have something that actually looks at like what I'm looking at, which is wild. And that's just from drawing classes I've taken because I've learned about specificity and like really removing my creative urges from what I'm actually seeing. And that's very good for no matter what you're painting.
I love, well, and perspective is so interesting because knowing what something is in 3D space, but what is so much different than what you see in 3D space.
You have to start looking at things like an artist, and that can start in a drawing class. There's a couple I like. If you're in the Seattle area, Gage Academy is one of my favorite art class places where they have in-person classes for youth, but also adults. And they're usually like 5 to 10 weeks. Sometimes they have weekend courses, but they are in drawing, they're in painting, they're in sculpture, they're in so many different things. Would highly recommend. They've got some great teachers there, but they also have some online classes. So if you're like, I'm not in Seattle, Stephanie, but I want to learn art, where do I go? You can find online classes that are truly great. Do you have any that you really like?
One of my favorite people to learn from originally was, and it was about specifically like just color, but also just playing with the materials was Jenna Rainey. And she's been on YouTube for like a million years. But what I love about these classes, so many of them offer like a free intro and then you could go take some more classes. So I love, they're going to pitch you the full course at the end of it, but then you get to see if you like their style. So I've done a bunch where it's been good. I also really, what did you call it? The Gage Academy? I want to go there.
Gauge is great. Yeah.
Gage.
Their classes tend to be like in the $300 to $600 range, depending on how long the course is, which is very cheap for per class. I am like, that's amazing. And I also really like Terracotta. Terracotta is online only, and they have more traditional art, so you're not going to see as much abstraction there, but there's some ateliers that are like year-long programs that you could look at. And I know when you're a beginner, you're just like, I don't know if I want a year-long program, but some of you will, and they're quite fun. And some of them are like, they do like semester-long things. So it's like you meet every single week and you have homework to do. And that can be really helpful when you're just like, I know I need to learn things, but I don't even know where to start to look to learn some things. That's good. And this is absolutely not an ad, but things like Skillshare and like online courses like that can be great because you pay like the one monthly fee and then you can just like explore to your heart's desire.
Well, and what you said about scheduling it, I think if you have time and this summer, this fall, this winter break, I'm going to really invest in my art, definitely like paying for something that's got a monthly subscription and
So
setting
good.
aside as much time as possible to go through it. Just even if you don't do all the things, but you end up watching a ton of videos, then you kind of get some ideas and then you know what you want to go with later. I do have so I do have one big suggestion, one big course that I took, and I took it online and I loved it. But it is an investment course, but it's a 3-month course. And it felt like going to art, like a graduate level art school. And I
Wow.
loved it. So it's called Art to Life. The program's called Creative Visionary Program. And then right into January, they have like some free workshops, like a week-long taste of it. So definitely do the free one. It's intensive and it moved my art forward in a way that felt like I was really returning to a full semester at school. So I really enjoyed it, but it was an investment and it's all online. So you don't have the in-person component, which I sometimes really think is important, but also it made it so you could attend easily from anywhere and they have live calls. So
Amazing.
that's that was the big one that I did that I was like, oh,
I've heard really good things about Art to Life from many artists, so would recommend. If you're thinking about a course and you're not really sure if it's going to be a good fit for what you're doing, you can send it to either me or Jen, and we'll be like yay or nay, and we'll give you our opinions on like if it's actually going to help you out or not.
yeah. Well, Stevie, I did a class that I don't know that I learned a lot from it, but it made me feel like I was returning to art. There was something called This Is Art Artify. At the time when I found it, they only had one class and now it's a bigger program.
Hmm.
But for me specifically, saying I'm going to sit down and take this class meant I was returning to my painting life. And the class, it was good. It was only about an hour. I don't know how much of it I incorporated into my practice, but I paid for it and I sat down and I did it. And I told my world, like, what did you do this weekend? Oh, I did this thing. So
Yeah,
sometimes it's just like diving into the world of art making helps you more than what the specific way of seeing or mixing like it's not necessarily like a tangible thing that you take away from it, but it's more of a general sense of you're in this world. And it's important to know that you're there when you're making art.
it's so important to feel like you're part of something, and it's encouraging. I feel like building an art community and finding the art communities around you when you're just beginning, a really great place to start is within a class because you're going to network a bit. You're going to meet the other students, and maybe even if it's just virtual, maybe there's like a Facebook group or a Discord group or whatever. You're going to talk to other artists. We met through an art course and it was really fun. And having something like that that helps expand your network within the art space will help keep you from feeling lonely and not knowing where you're going and continuing to find inspiration. How do you like to find art like communities?
Okay, it's funny because I knew we were going to talk about this and I was really
Yeah.
excited to share this. Look for open studios around you.
Oh, so good.
They're so
Yeah,
good and they're everywhere. Like if you live in a big city, it's probably easier to find them at all times of the year. But I know even in rural communities, like you can find them. So just search open studios, your area, your city, but ask the library. And art supply stores often let artists there's often like a bulletin board, or
totally.
again, those people are the people who work there. I mean,
They're so
ask
good.
if there are open studios, classes, events, because there's always somebody doing something. So just go ask. But open studios, I think, is such a great way to see who's around you. And
Look,
then, yeah,
look
like
for
what they're
things like
making.
drink and draws. Look for like drawing like free live models and things like that. Sometimes they're like costume models, especially with the library. The library puts on some rad events for artists. And then when you're there, make sure you're like actually talking to people.
Yeah.
Don't get shy and just like make your art. Like go over and like comment nicely on what they're making and ask them, how long have you been making art? And then if you say you're a beginner, oh my gosh, the world will open up. People will be like, you're a beginner? Oh, I'm so happy you're here. Let me tell you about all these fun things. Like people like beginners. So
It's so true. I feel like the art community is so excited to have like we want to know, what is it you want to make? What do you want to
mhm,
say? What do you want to make me feel? Like I think that artists are so interested in seeing other people's artwork. It's such an inclusive community in real life. Like I know that there's a lot of like noise online about art criticism and mean posts on like mean comments on posts, but that's not at all what I've ever found in the real world.
it's true. It's true. If you want a art community, I'm gonna boost Brushworks art community here. Brushwork has a community called the Arts and Crafts Table. It's on Discord, and it is a community of 300 plus other artists who are making things every day. We have people who are painters, we have people who do drawing, who do illustration, who do digital work. You can come onto the Discord, post about your work. There's prompts every couple of days about things you can make. There are people having discussions about art theory. It's really quite fun, and it's just like, an immediate community in your pocket. And if you tell me you're a beginner and you've come from this video, I'm so excited to talk to you about what you're gonna make. I'm gonna be like right there.
It's true. And I feel like that group keeps growing and keeps becoming more supportive.
It's so wholesome. It's so nice.
It's so wholesome. That's a good way to say it. It is.
Yeah, and when people want a critique, like say you're making something and you're just like, okay, I know I need help with this and I don't know where. That is a place where you can post your picture and the community will give you constructive criticism. Not be nasty to you, but be like, here are steps you can take to make your art better, which is what we want. And I'm really proud of my little arts and craft table. You're the best.
I love that. Well, and then once you get into these communities, you start to see the language that they use to respond to work.
Mhm.
And it helps you respond to your own work. You get this language on how to view something and how to respond to it.
Totally, totally. For our very last question today, I was like, ooh, do a really fun game. What if you we're going to do a hypothetical here.
Okay.
What if you were like, okay, I am starting to make art. I want to make painting. And I have a budget of like $1,000. In Dreamland, we have $1,000 budget and you want to spend it over the course of a year. How would you spend it to get you started in abstract acrylic painting from nothing? Where would you spend this?
Okay. I would get good paper, well, watercolor paper in smaller sizes so that you could really have a lot to practice. I would get 8 to 12 colors, and you could there's mid-tier that are excellent. Like the pigment load is amazing. Like with Liquitex Basics, like
Yeah.
their pigment load is amazing. You don't want like kid grade. It's not the same, but like invest in some good paints, but it doesn't have to be the best. Get the cheapest brushes you can get. And then I'd stop there and just start painting, and I would just investigate free outlets for the first few months. Then maybe sign up for a class like that you have at Gage or a community college, or a lot of artists have like weekend workshops, and maybe that's where you want to spend it. But I think I'd start with some supplies, do some free stuff, and see what I'm really excited about, and either get more education in that or more supplies for that. And then really take that one idea and push it forward. Because maybe you want giant canvases, and for the rest of the $1,000, like that'll be it for the year. Or maybe you want to get really detailed and you want a really good, realistic painting lesson or class. So yeah, start with good stuff, pause, see what you're excited about, invest more.
If I were to do this with oil painting, I would spend probably like $200 on paint and supplies. I would be like, okay, we're getting brushes. I'm getting like a huge variety of brushes. I want small ones, but I also want like really large ones. And I want to make sure that I'm using all of the variety and not just my itty bitty little paintbrush. This is a life hack. If you find yourself going for the same thing over and over and you're in your beginning like 3 years, I would like maybe like put that tiny paintbrush in like the freezer, or like give it to a friend to like babysit while you're getting good. So I would get lots of paint. There's this company called Gamblin that makes this student grade paint called the 1980 line, and the pigments they're so good and they're so great, and it's going to make you transitioning from the student grade into the professional grade a lot easier in a year or two. I would get their whole collection. You can actually get like a whole set of them for like $50, and you get like 10 paints and a medium to mix in, which is great. I would get yourself some rags. You can just cut up an old sheet, or you can get like some old towels and cut them up. And then I would get surfaces to paint on. I would get oil primed paint paper, and I would probably spend like $100 on just like surfaces to paint on, and I would get like plenty. I feel like sometimes when you're a beginner, you're like, but I only have 4 canvases. Like, get yourself a lot of stuff to paint on, because you're gonna make bad art, and you need to like you have to get it out of your system. It's great. And then I would get myself a sketchbook that was not tiny. Get yourself like an 8x10 sketchbook, and I would get some graphite pencils that were like 4B to like 4H, that whole range. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look that up. I will have them linked in the description though. And I would immediately sign up for a drawing class. I would do this very first thing. You can find them for cheaper ones, like under $100. You can find more extensive ones that are like 10 weeks, which is a long time for a class, for like under $500 usually. And then from there, this would be like the first half of the year, you were just like drawing every day. I would then find a color mixing class for the second half, and I would make those two classes the first thing I learned, like a drawing class and then a color mixing class, because that'll get you really far. Yeah,
That
that's
sounds
what I would do
amazing. Oh, I love it. I do have one other recommendation for a paint brand. It's called Nova Color.
Nova Color, nice.
Yeah. They're out of LA, but they ship direct to artists and their paints are at the Liquitex Golden level. But because they're not in stores, you save money and they have like a little, I think it's $1, but you could get like their paint card sample sent to you first, and then you could order from there. And it's their paint is excellent quality, and it's a really good way to start. But I want to piggyback on what you said about getting those paints and like paint a ton, use up your paints. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think in that first year, if you have the mindset of this is how much money I'm going to spend on it, be done with that money. Have those tubes empty, go through it. There's some kind of precious quality around new supplies. And when you're new, you're like, well, I don't want to use too much of it up. And I don't know why, but use it. Like
Mm-hmm.
spend the money, get the paint down. And that's like really like in order to paint, you have to use paint.
You gotta. One of the reasons why I say you should sign up for a drawing class immediately is that a lot of art stores will give student discounts, and it doesn't have to be accredited. You don't have to be like, I'm a student at like a college. You can just be like, I'm at an academy, or I'm a student, I'm being privately mentored. And you'll usually get 10 to 15% off at every single art store. This has to be an in-person store you go into, but I've never been to an in-person store where they haven't been like, are you a student? Just saying. So
That's a good
like,
point.
sign up for your class and then go buy your art supplies. And usually they don't ask you where you're a student from. You can just say yes, but if they do, just be like, oh, I'm at this local place, or I'm at this local like wherever you're learning from. It's great.
Oh, I have one other thing that I would do the first year.
What would you do?
Any artist that you like, go to their website and sign up for their newsletter. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like you see stuff on Instagram and on YouTube, but artists share so much of what they're working on. And what I have found through other people's newsletters are residencies to apply to, classes that either they're teaching or they've taken. And then I go down that same path, go to museums and galleries. And I think it's important as an artist to be open to all kinds of art. But one of the things that is tricky, because you do have to protect your art time, and going to all these things takes time. I feel like there's, again, we were talking about this before, there's so much like history and like the Renaissance, and like, I don't want to make those types of paintings, but I always felt compelled to go to those museums. And once I finally gave myself permission to skip the Louvre and go to the weird galleries down the alleyways in Paris, oh my God, like the whole world opened up. And it's not to say there's anything wrong with the Louvre. It's just there's a time frame of the art that's in there. And I want to make art from this time frame. Allow yourself to follow like whatever it is that's the most exciting, and then go seek it.
It's not that you're avoiding other arts, it's that you're focusing on what you want to learn as a beginner, right? Your art history education, it's just going to come to you whether you like it or not later. So so focusing on what's like really sparking your interest is going to lend you towards your goals. It's going to be good. So yeah, follow your hyper interests and you're going to have a better time. It's not like you're never going to look at all the art in the Louvre. You want to go there at some point, but if you want to go to the weird galleries, go to the weird galleries. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no shoulds. You're just going to do what you want.
There's no shoulds. Follow the spark. Yeah.
Mhm. As my
Yeah.
friend Brittany says, don't should all over yourself. Just do what you want. We covered a lot of ground here, but if you do have questions, both me and Jen would love to chat with you. Thanks for listening to Brushwork, friends and foes. It's good to see you. Have a great day. Make good choices. Until next time, goodbye.